What is up, guys? Rick Cacus here, and today we have another Anthem update discussing the latest news and information on BioWare's new game. Now, today's information does come from our boy Brennan Holmes, who is the technical design director at BioWare. He is extremely active, especially on the Reddit, and he's just answering question after question, and I've got to say, right off the start here, I know a lot of you guys watching are really looking forward to Anthem, but I still see a lot of people who are very, let's just say, cautious about another big game published by EA, and that's totally understandable, but credit where credit is due. I have never in my life seen developers be this open about a game that isn't out yet. Brennan Holmes is talking about things that they've tried and didn't work, things that they're still looking into, even sometimes problems they face. And this is the stuff that we really want to see. I mean, Destiny 2 didn't even say a word aside from the official announcements and trailers, and kind of bamboozled a lot of people, so I'm really glad to see a much more open approach with Anthem, and that is definitely a good sign of things to come, if you don't mind me saying. Now, speaking of Brennan Holmes, some of you may wonder, well, what exactly is his role at BioWare? What does he do, and how does he have the knowledge and authority to be answering all of these questions? Well, he spoke to that directly, saying, "The easiest way to describe it is that my team and I worry about almost any questions that starts with how. When we all put our rings together, we try to help people solve complex problems that come up in the day-to-day work for people on the project." That's a bit vague, but basically we work and collaborate on a very broad swath of stuff. In terms of my interactions with you here, if you have a question, ask. If I don't have the answer, I'll try to find someone who does, assuming it's something we can talk about. So that's some background information before we move forward with the more heavy-hitting info. And speaking of heavy-hitting info, last Anthem update, we talked about, for the first time, the flight system and some details about it. I would highly recommend you watch that video if you haven't, especially if you are an Anthem fan, but Brennan Holmes expanded on what we talked about last time. The original comment by Brennan Holmes states that even though he's not an exploration guy, he finds himself exploring because it is so much fun and so accessible. He also states that there's going to be progression and skill expression with the flight system in Anthem, which is huge. It means it's not just a base mechanic, it's something that can be upgraded and improved. But also he talks about how there's limits to flying. There's a downdraft if you go too high, for example, and they're still playing around with the flight system and its finalization. Now, someone comments on that and says, "Any chance we could get a Javelin?" And remember, a Javelin is Anthem's name for the robotic suits, specialized for flying. Something like this would be a neat concept to explore, an airborne Javelin that could perform airstrikes of a sort. And this is the image that hyperlinked this leads to. It's definitely a robotic suit meant for flying above everything else. Now, Brennan Holmes does reply, saying, "Nice concept. We definitely aren't doing anything like this for the initial set of suits. There's room to explore ideas like this down the road, but I think we need to be a bit careful with flight. A lot of the restrictions with flying are due to performance considerations. Obviously, if you're flying above the entire map and is trying to render all of that, a console could not handle that. If we push things too far, we could end up in the danger zone." I get it. Then he says, "Complete aside, when we had an early prototype of flight working, one of our engineers put together a video of himself flying around the map with a theme of Top Gun. It was amazing. He even had the intro roll." So, what info does this comment tell us? Well, surface level. If you are someone who is looking for a suit dedicated to flying, it looks like that won't be in the game. However, every suit will have the ability to fly, and that ability will be improvable. However, it is interesting that he says initial set of suits. We are able to infer by that statement that BioWare is looking to add via DLC, maybe paid DLC, maybe free DLC, but more suits. And that's pretty darn sweet. That we're going to be getting these DLC suits that are likely going to come with vastly different abilities and upgrades and so on. It seems like the suits in Anthem are essentially the classes you can play. And when you introduce new classes, that is huge. I mean, with Destiny and the Taken King introducing just new subclasses, that was a massive differentiating factor in your gameplay. And if Destiny or Destiny 2 even adds another class aside from Titan Hunter Warlock, my goodness, the community would be abuzz. So getting more suits via DLC, I think that's a very good way to keep the game fresh. But I'm also glad to hear that the limitations being placed on flight are mainly due to performance issues, that the consoles cannot handle it, rather than just limiting you for the sake of limiting you. Now, we've talked about flight, but what about the opposite? In the trailer, we saw a player go underwater. How does the underwater system work in Anthem? Well, someone asks, in the trailer, there was an underwater area. Can you give us any insight on that? Brennan Holmes says, what specifically are you curious about? And he says, like, will there be any underwater combat or oxygen systems? Great question. Brennan Holmes does reply, there is currently an oxygen system. You can't stay underwater forever. It currently regenerates while you're out of the water. I don't think we're talking too much about combat just yet. So, oxygen system in Anthem confirmed. And that does make sense. That's, I think, what most people were expecting. But that also means that all of the underwater areas are now great places to hide loot. If you have an oxygen system, you can only stay down for a certain amount of time, hiding loot and loot caches at the very bottom or in areas that you really have to know where you're going. You have to find these hidden caves and try to reach that loot just before your oxygen system runs out. That is a mechanism that a lot of games do use, and it's a very fun mechanism. So definitely explore those underwater areas in Anthem. It's likely going to be a great place to find hidden loot. Now, the combat talk is really interesting. Can you shoot your guns while underwater or use abilities or something, right? If you can, that opens up, my goodness, so many possibilities of like killer fish and sea monsters that you could potentially find and fight in underwater areas. Will there be entire underwater boss battles in Anthem? That's insane to even think about how far this game is going if they do that. And the fact that he's saying we're not ready to talk about it rather than just saying no, it's not in the game, that's at least a sign in the positive. So that is very interesting. So we've talked about suits in Anthem. They let you fly in the sky, they let you go underwater, but can you get out of your suit and engage in combat as a normal person? Or potentially get out of your suit and explore, go to smaller openings that your suit couldn't fit in, right? That's actually a very interesting question, and someone does ask that, saying, I'm curious about if you're able to use combat outside of the suits. And Brennan Holmes does reply. We had a prototype of this early on, but we ran into a lot of problems. The world is fairly dangerous. Some of the smallest non-hostile creatures in the game are basically like small horses to humans, and they probably eat humans, honestly. So you really didn't have a lot of combat interaction beyond getting eaten. The larger problem had to do with getting stuck. You could hop out of your suit and then fall into a ravine, and then basically you were just screwed, since humans have nowhere near the same mobility as a suit. All in all, while it was a cool atmosphere thing, it was terrifying, there wasn't enough gameplay to support it without a ton of work. So it doesn't look like the ability to get out of your suit will be coming as a main feature in Anthem, but that's still an interesting discussion, and this is an example I gave at the beginning of the video of, you know what, we tried that, it didn't work, here's why, and so we're probably not going to have that in the game. I would much rather have that than just complete silence or just a no. Like, this is great communication from the developers. Now, speaking of great communication, someone comes up with the idea that it would be cool to hear, especially if you're wearing headsets, the mechanical noises of your suit moving, kind of the cranks, the clinks, the hydraulics working, and Brennan Holmes responds saying, this is definitely an interesting idea. I'll send it over to the audio guys. So There you go. There's someone coming up with a sweet idea, and Brendan Holmes saying, yep, I'll pass it to the team. Again, amazing communication. Why doesn't Bungie do this? And moving on from there, we see Brendan Holmes reply to a comment saying that the setting of Anthem takes place at not Earth. And there you have it. Anthem confirmed to be on a different planet than Earth. Now moving on from there, Anthem certainly seems to have a lot of features, right? But how big is this game? Someone says, how many gigabytes should we expect to see out of Anthem? And Brendan Holmes responds with, many. It's difficult to give you a meaningful number. Sizes change when we make final builds. We haven't done a lot of optimization yet to reduce duplication of assets and packages, and not all of the content exists yet. We're still making stuff. Right now, Anthem is a bit under 200 gigabytes on my hard drive, but that's definitely going to change, and what you'll see size-wise will likely be different, and he edits that. I clarified this a further down, but ignore that number. These are just raw assets that aren't really indicative of the size/install disk. Now, of course, you hear that, and the thing that sticks out is 200 gigabytes, and I'm sure a lot of you watching are going, wait a minute, like, am I gonna have to buy a new hard drive just to play this game? But again, no. He does clarify it further down, simply saying this is just a number that's early in development. It's 100% going to change. They're going to compact the coding. They're going to, like he says, reduce duplication of assets and stuff like that. You're looking a lot more at something like, 60 to 80 gigabytes or less, right? I'm spitballing here, but it's not going to be 200. And I wanted to go over this because I have just saved all of you from the hundreds of clickbaity things that are going to come out saying Anthem is 200 gigabytes from people who don't do the research. No, it's just a raw development number, but it is kind of a sweet indication that there's 200 gigabytes worth of stuff, essentially, that this is a big game. Yes, it's going to be reduced through a bunch of different techniques, but it's still likely to be a lot of content. And that's why the first thing he says is many, right? You're looking at a lot of game here, and that does come with a lot of storage requirements. That's a little bit unfortunate, but you always want to hear, like, in the end of the day, you want to hear more gigabytes than suspiciously little gigabytes, because you're like, where's the content? Why is this such a small game? It seems like that won't be happening with Anthem. Now, moving on from there, we have something really interesting. As an Anthem fan, this is huge. Someone asked the question, will there be an option to switch the character's handedness, saying I'm left-handed and it's kind of weird playing games in third person where your character is always right-handed. So Brendan Holmes says, I'll ask, but I'm pretty sure the answer is no. It's not that it's impossible, it's rather complex, and it's not high on the priority list, which is totally fair. Of all the things you want in Anthem, switching your handedness is not going to be at the top of the list. But someone replies with, couldn't you just flip the character without flipping the world? Like, wouldn't that be easy? And it turns out, no, it's not that easy, obviously, but Brendan Holmes replies, yep, it's possible to mirror the animation, but you start running into issues with attachments. For example, if the bolt on a rifle is on the right side and the animation is synced to that, we'd need to flip the geometry of the weapon as well. Beyond that, we're probably also having to flip the camera since it's placed where it is to give you a good view of what you're doing. Beyond that, a lot of enemy presentation is generally to the right as well to ensure that your character isn't blocking any of the tells. I'm sure there's probably other concerns I'm not aware of as well. Basically, it's probably possible, most things are, but there are a lot of knock-on effects, and that's where we start to get into trouble if we want to do it well. So why is that big news? Well, for the first time ever, we see a mention of weapon attachments. Now, it could be that Brendan Holmes misspoke, but he does say we start running into issues with attachments. Right after that, he says an example of that, a bolt on a rifle. So it does look like weapons are having an attachment system in Anthem. And again, that's huge. Many successful, very successful loot-based games like Borderlands and even Destiny have not had an attachment system. The best example of a game with an attachment system is something like The Division. And the fact that Anthem does have attachments, likely we're going to see sights and different types of magazines potentially and all of that stuff, that opens up a ton of customization, and it really changes what I thought the loot system would be. I mean, we saw in the trailer someone get this type of gun, and it looked honestly like a potentially more simplistic loot system. You get these weapons, and those weapons are the weapons. But the fact that you're potentially looting these attachments as well, and attaching, again, scopes and magazines and potentially different barrels and all of this stuff to your weapons, that is really going to add complication in a good way and customization to the game. And even though the example I brought up was The Division that has an attachment system, this is a futuristic game in a completely alien planet. BioWare could go nuts. We could have attachments that makes your gun shoot electricity potentially instead of normal bullets, shoot laser beams instead of normal bullets, do all of this crazy stuff, have heat-seeking properties, have seeking bullets, like whatever you want to do in the game. Because it is so futuristic, they have almost unlimited creativity. And that's very exciting. Now, moving on from there, the last few things we're going to cover. Someone asked, does the current iteration of the UI user interface resemble anything like we saw in the trailer back in June? And Brendan Holmes does reply, it's changed a little bit. Some elements have been moved around, but it's fairly similar. So that's good news, I think. I like the user interface in the trailer. I thought it was very minimalistic, helps you get lost in the world, so I hope they keep something, again, similar to that. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about is a crafting system. Does Anthem have a crafting system, right? Well, someone actually posted a video on the Reddit making a case for Anthem to have a Dragon Age Inquisition-like crafting system. And Brennan Holmes responded, if we had a crafting system in Anthem, what kind of things would you like to see? General question, I'll roll the initial post into the feedback. And of course, a lot of people did reply with their ideas. So again, interesting type of communication we're seeing here. It's great that we're seeing this. So should Anthem have a crafting system? And what kind of crafting system should it be? Well, we've seen some great games with some great crafting systems. Like the video brought up, Dragon Age Inquisition, we have the new Monster Hunter world, so those crafting systems benefit the games. But we also have something like Mass Effect Andromeda, also made by BioWare, and a really convoluted, hard to access, hard to understand, frankly annoying to navigate crafting system that didn't really, in my opinion, help the game. And we've also had many loot-based shooters, like I brought up earlier. We have Destiny 1, we have Borderlands that never had crafting systems, and they did just fine. So I think if BioWare can get a very good, helpful crafting system into the game that benefits gameplay, that's great. They've done it before, but don't force in a crafting system that isn't necessary like Mass Effect Andromeda seemed to have done to it, because that's not going to be a great feature. And so guys, that is it for the video discussing all of the latest information about Anthem. I hope you enjoyed and found this informative. If you did, please remember to help me out by simply rating and especially sharing this video. If you guys want to see more Anthem content, be sure to slap that subscribe button, and if you actually want that button to do anything, be sure to press the bell beside subscribe. If you guys want to get in touch with me and keep up to date with the latest channel activity, the best way is to follow me on Twitter at RickCacus. That's linked in the description down below, as is my Twitch channel, which you can also follow. Again, I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, have a good day.